Nora had always felt like she was wandering through life rather than truly living it. Her small coastal town, nestled between rugged cliffs and the endless sea, was a place where everyone knew everyone. The streets were narrow and paved with old cobblestones, and the houses, each painted in faded pastel colors, leaned together as if sharing secrets. Tourists sometimes came in the summer months, drawn by the wild beauty of the cliffs, but mostly, life in the village was quiet and unchanging. Her father's bakery sat on the corner of the main street, its windows always fogged with the warmth of fresh bread. Nora spent her mornings there, waking before dawn to knead dough alongside her father. The rhythm of mixing, shaping, and baking was comforting, but also repetitive. Her mother would hum softly as she arranged pastries on trays, asking Nora to fetch more flour or help carry trays to the front. During school hours, Nora drifted through her classes, rarely raising her hand. Teachers often remarked on her quietness, and classmates sometimes mistook it for indifference. But Nora paid close attention to everything around her. She noticed when the old clock tower started chiming late, or when the fishermen hauled in fewer fish, or when the first autumn leaves fell onto the wet sand. She scribbled these details into her weathered notebook, filling its pages with sketches and fragments of thoughts. Afternoons were when the ache in her chest felt strongest. She would walk to the edge of town, past rows of fishing boats and broken nets, and climb the grassy hill to the lighthouse. The lighthouse had not worked for years, but to Nora, it was the only place she felt she could breathe. Sometimes she would sit alone for hours, the sea wind pulling at her hair, the cries of gulls echoing in the emptiness. She wondered if anyone else could feel so out of place in their own home. At night, she watched her parents move quietly around their small living room, speaking in low voices about grocery lists or the price of flour. Nora listened in silence, pretending to read or do homework. She hated to worry them, so she hid her sadness behind a gentle smile or a mumbled "I'm tired." Deep down, she wondered if her parents remembered what it felt like to dream about something more, or if they had simply let those dreams go. Autumn was coming, and with it, change. The sea became rougher and the sky turned grey, mirroring the confusion inside her. Her friends made plans for the future, whispering about city universities and new lives far from the village's reach. Nora watched their excitement with a quiet envy, too afraid to admit she didn't know what she wanted, or if she was brave enough to leave behind everything she'd ever known. As the days grew shorter, Nora often found herself standing barefoot at the water's edge, watching the horizon turn gold at sunset. She realized she was waiting. For what? She did not know. All she had was an ache in her heart that told her life had more to offer, if only she could find the strength to reach for it. But for now, she let the waves carry her sadness away, hoping one day she would discover who she was meant to become. As autumn settled over the town, Nora's sense of restlessness only grew. Each morning felt colder than the last, and the salty air seemed heavier, pressing around her like a weight she couldn't shake off. The bakery's glow was still a comfort, but even the sweet smell of cinnamon buns couldn't chase away the shadows coiling at the edges of her mind. Nora's friends rarely noticed her drifting away. They laughed about their weekends, shared gossip about teachers, and traded secrets about their first crushes. Nora listened quietly, smiling when she was meant to, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She wished she could share what she felt, how her heart ached with every sunrise, how she sometimes woke before dawn just to sit alone and stare at the ceiling. But each time she tried, the words dried up in her throat. Her only confidant was her notebook. The pages were crowded with rough sketches of stormy seas, empty boats, and haunting eyes. At the lighthouse, she scribbled late into the afternoon, capturing not just the world outside, but snapshots of her own loneliness. She wrote about dreams she never spoke aloud and fears she couldn't explain, even to herself. One evening, as amber light spilled over the cliffs, Nora overheard her parents' quiet conversation. Her mother's voice was hushed, filled with concern. "She's not herself lately," she whispered. "Do you think something's wrong?" Her father only sighed. Nora crept back to her room, curling under the covers, wishing she could be braver, wishing she could tell them how she felt so lost, so disconnected from everyone around her. But for now, It seemed easier to keep her sadness tucked inside, where no one could see. She wondered if anyone else in the world ever felt so invisible. As the night pressed in and rain tapped softly at the window, Nora promised herself that tomorrow would be better. But as she drifted to sleep, the ache lingered, a quiet reminder that she was still searching for a way out of the sadness that clung to her like the mist rolling in from the sea. The days passed slowly, blurring together like watercolors in the rain. One chilly afternoon, after another long and silent day at school, Nora wandered to the lighthouse for comfort. The air was sharp with the smell of brine and old seaweed, but it brought Nora a sense of calm. She climbed the creaking wooden steps inside the lighthouse, not expecting anyone to be there. But as she reached the top, she froze. Someone was sitting by the dirty glass window, a boy about her age with sandy hair and a sketchbook resting on his knee. He looked startled when Nora appeared, but then smiled nervously, gesturing for her to come closer. "I didn't think anyone else came up here," he said softly, closing his sketchbook awkwardly. Nora hesitated, her heart pounding. She rarely talked with strangers, especially not in her secret place. Still, something gentle in the boy's voice loosened the knot in her stomach. She sat beside him, her eyes flicking to the notebook in his hands. "I like to draw, too," she whispered, barely audible over the wind rattling the glass. The boy introduced himself as Emil. He had moved to the village with his mother just a few weeks ago and felt almost as out of place as Nora did. They sat together in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing glances at each other's work. Emil's drawings were full of movement and light, so different from Nora's moody, shadowy sketches. For the first time in a long while, Nora felt seen. As the evening darkened outside and the lighthouse lanterns began to glow in the distance, Nora realized she was no longer alone with her sadness. Someone else understood what it meant to feel like an outsider. When they parted that evening, Emil promised he'd be back the next day. Nora walked home with a new feeling, a tiny spark of hope growing inside her, fragile but bright against the darkness she carried. Over the next few weeks, Nora and Emil met almost every day at the lighthouse. Their friendship grew quietly, one careful conversation at a time. With Emil, Nora found herself laughing again, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in so long. It felt unfamiliar. They talked about everything and nothing, their families, their schools, the things they wished for but never said out loud. Emil admitted he missed his old city and struggled to feel at home in the quiet village. Nora shared her secret notebooks, shy at first, surprised when Emil admired her art without judgment. Sometimes they walked along the shore, trading stones they'd found or sharing stories about the shapes in the clouds. On rainy days, they stayed inside the lighthouse, drawing side by side, the sound of the rain their only witness. As days passed, Nora felt the heaviness inside her slowly lifting. She still had moments of sadness, but now there was someone she could trust, someone who understood even when she said nothing at all. Emil never pushed her to talk about what hurt, but he listened whenever she was ready. At home, her parents noticed the change in her. Nora didn't tell them about Emil, not yet, but she smiled more often and joined them in conversation at dinner. She even started looking forward to small things, the smell of cinnamon buns at dawn, or the sound of the wind against her window. For the first time, Nora wondered if maybe she didn't need a dramatic change to feel better. Sometimes, she realized, all it took was a single person to help you see your world in a new way. But even as her days grew lighter, Nora knew deep inside that the sadness wasn't gone, it had only changed shape. And with winter approaching, she wondered what would happen if everything she cared about was swept away by the next storm. Winter arrived with biting winds and grey skies that seemed to hang over the village without end. The sea grew rough, waves crashing angrily against the rocks, and the streets emptied of all but the most determined fishermen. Despite the cold, Nora still made her way to the lighthouse, sometimes with Emil, sometimes alone, clutching her notebook close. One afternoon, during a heavy storm, she sat alone in her room, listening as the wind rattled the window panes. The weight she thought she had escaped began to press in on her again. Memories and worries circled in her mind. What if Emil moved away like so many people before him? What if her sadness never really left? She tried to busy herself with drawing, but her hands shook. The sketches turned darker, shapes blurred and tangled, the paper marked with lines she could hardly control. Her parents noticed the sadness returning. This time, though, Nora didn't hide behind her silence. Over dinner, she gathered her courage and spoke, not about everything, not in detail, but enough to let them know she was struggling. Her mother squeezed her hand, and her father promised that she didn't have to carry her pain alone. There were tears and quiet, but also understanding. The next day, Emil joined her at the lighthouse, bringing 2 mugs of hot tea. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he sat beside her, sharing the silence. Eventually, Nora opened up to him too, shaky but determined. She spoke of her fears, her worries about the future, and the darkness that sometimes flooded her thoughts. Emil listened, sharing some of his own struggles, and told her that it was okay to not be okay. For the first time, Nora realized she didn't have to battle her sadness by herself. Admitting her feelings, to her family and her friend, was a small, trembling act of bravery, but it opened a door she hadn't known was there. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the lighthouse, Nora felt a flicker of warmth begin to grow, as if hope itself had found a way in. The days after the storm felt different. For the first time in months, Nora woke with a sense of calm instead of dread. The sky outside was still winter grey, but the air seemed softer, less heavy. She realized, slowly, that the darkness she'd felt inside wasn't gone forever. She might always carry a small part of it, but now she had hope and people around her who understood. With the support of her family and Emil, Nora started to let herself believe in better days. She accepted that sadness was natural, something even those around her felt from time to time. She remembered stories she'd read online, like the girl who lost her grandmother yet found peace remembering her love, or the strangers who carried on after dark nights, believing hope could return. These stories echoed in Nora's heart, reminding her that although everyone's pain was different, no one was truly alone. She brought her sketches to life, bravely joining the village's winter festival art show. Emil stood beside her, proud and smiling, while her parents watched from the edge of the room. For the first time, Nora saw joy in their eyes, knowing she was letting the world see a piece of her soul. Spring finally came, blowing away the last traces of winter's cold. Nora still visited the lighthouse, often with Emil, but now she welcomed the company. She learned that sharing the hard parts of her story didn't make her weak, it made her human, and brought her closer to the people who cared about her. Nora still had quiet days, but she faced them differently now, understanding that sadness could sit alongside hope, and that healing was a slow, gentle process. Looking out at the endless ocean, Nora realized that she wasn't waiting for her life to begin. She was living it, one honest moment at a time, surrounded by love,